Definitely thinking about this, if you're doing air freight, you probably take 1 day or less than 1 day from Houston to LA
Hmm.
for transporting some goods, but the cost is 10x.
Yeah.
In comparison, if you do it with human, maybe four days from LA to Houston, and with autonomy, 1 day.
Mm.
So
Wow.
there is basically, I think autonomous driving is, especially for long range driving, is actually offering a very different product than the traditional trucking.
Dr. Xiaodi Hou is the founder and CEO of Bot Auto and a leading pioneer in autonomous trucking. With a PhD from Caltech and a background in AI, machine learning, and computer vision, Xiaodi has spent over a decade advancing autonomous driving systems for commercial vehicles. He's presented at major global events like Web Summit and NVIDIA GTC, and his work has been featured in Wired and Forbes. Xiaodi, how are you doing today?
Doing great. How about you, Harry?
I'm doing well, or should I say, Dr. Xiaodi, how are you doing today?
Thank you. Yeah, nobody calls me doctor in the office.
All right. Well, I'm excited to have you here on the podcast. And you are my first interview that I've done in the autonomous trucking space. I don't know if I mentioned this, but actually, our rideshare guy website and YouTube channel that we're most, sort of best known for, we've been covering the space for 11 years. The most popular video we've actually ever done is a truck driving video. One of our Uber and Lyft driver contributors quit, went to drive a truck. It got 7 million views on YouTube. So I'm not an expert like yourself, but I might know enough to be dangerous. I think this will be a fun interview.
Sure. Looking forward.
Awesome. So for those who may not know, tell us a little bit about Bot Auto and how you got started with the company.
Sure. Bot Auto is headquartered in Houston, Texas. We like Texas because the regulation for autonomous trucking, in specific in Texas, is very supportive. And I started the company in 2023, July, here in Houston, Texas, and we focus on level 4 autonomous driving trucks.
Hmm.
For those who don't know, there are different levels for autonomy. Level 4 is the first level where you do not need a human to be present in the vehicle, and the vehicle is supposedly to drive by itself in dedicated lanes where we have been validated. And we're doing level 4 trucking.
Got it. So it's interesting. Okay, so you mentioned Houston, Texas, regulation friendly. And then I think the other thing that stood out to me about your background is you've been at this. So it's a relatively new company, but you yourself have been at this for a while. So talk a little bit about your personal kind of history before Bot Auto. And sounds like you've done, maybe a decade or more working on autonomous vehicles.
Sure, yeah. My educational background is on computer science and a little bit of the neuroscience, cognitive science, combination of a lot of interesting stuff. But after graduating, I've been doing startups, and my first startup, we're on the online advertising with computer vision to recognize images in the
Hmm.
websites, which didn't really went well. And then the second startup is called Too Simple, doing autonomous trucking. And Too Simple, I had a 8-year journey there. And after leaving Too Simple, I started Bot Auto with a lot of
Hmm.
new thoughts about what do I need to build for a real autonomous trucking company.
Yeah.
And all of the thoughts are being very, very, I think, disruptive in terms of the common knowledge or common perception about autonomous driving. Whenever people talk about autonomous driving, people talk about technology,
Hmm.
talk about how futuristic, how cool it is. But in fact, after 8 years in this industry, in my last company, I found that what is really needed for autonomous trucking industry is a innovation in the business model. That's
Hmm.
why Bot Auto starts off by considering ourselves not as a technology provider, but as an operator of the autonomous driving trucks.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I think there's we talked a lot about this AV 1.0 and AV 2.0 journey. I mean, it's kind of interesting that for, maybe a decade or more, it was kind
Yeah.
of all, I don't know, would you call it hype? I mean, there was a lot of excitement, there was a lot of companies raising money, and, there really wasn't anyone doing L4 autonomy, like you mentioned, right? Until maybe in the past year or two. So how do you think about kind of that past period, when you started Too Simple 8 years ago versus now?
Definitely, there's a hype. I mean, hype is always there. Whenever there's a
Hmm.
consensus, I mean, the other word for hype is consensus. Whenever there
Hmm.
is a consensus that is becoming deviating from the reality, I mean, a
Hmm.
consensus that deviates from the reality is a hype. That's my
Hmm.
definition. And I think there is
Got it.
definitely a certain amount of hype. I mean, hype is just a matter of it's a matter of time. Within a certain period of time, people believe in something and then they drift from the reality. and then people focus on something else. And there is a world of hype, there's a world of after hype. I think right now we're living in the world of after hype.
Yeah.
But apart from the hype versus after hype, there is always a reality, and the reality is business. How can you make money? And this is a question that I've been asking myself every day. And I think Bot Auto, by operating the system by itself, we are actually solving, I believe, the core problem of autonomous driving. 10 years ago, autonomous driving was considered an unsolved problem, where we're still exploring the new frontier and trying to understand what algorithm could potentially bring to the world about autonomous driving. That was about 10 years ago. It's like nobody knows how to do it. It's uncharted territory. But now, with the availability of new technologies, I mean, solving the problem becomes much easier and easier. Like basically, no one is going to argue against each other, like, is autonomous driving a solvable problem or not? It is a solvable problem. We all know that now. But it was not like this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But now the problem is, I think, not so obvious, but people should answer this question, but the answer is not obvious. How can we make money out of autonomous driving?
Got it. Okay. So I like that framing that, 10 years ago, we didn't know if we could solve driving. And obviously, there was a lot of excitement and interest and a lot of money went into it. And now we I think it's a consensus, like you said, that it's a solvable problem. Obviously, there's Waymo. Obviously, we'll talk about what you guys have done, companies in China. Would you say, though, would you go one step further and say that autonomous driving has been solved? Because there's still a lot of companies that are developing their AV technology. They're not at the L4. Like, should I assume that Neuro, Wave, May Mobility, all of these other companies, and even some in the trucking space, should it be kind of a given that they're eventually going to get there in the next year or two, for example?
Well, I think theoretically this is a solve the problem. That is where the consensus is at right now. But for example, if you're asking me, Xiaodi, can you build a smartphone manufacturing company and be successful? I'm not sure. So I think like it's highly likely that I won't. So, but today people won't argue that a new cell phone manufacturing or a smartphone manufacturing company could exist and could be developed. So I think this is really the type of thing. It's more like a company specific. Will this company be successful or not? Is becoming the question. And I think the organizational problem has several pillars. On one hand is the technology pillar. Can one company organize its task force or organize its engineers in an efficient way such that in a given period of time, a given period of investor patience, they can build something great?
Yeah.
And on the technology, apart from the technology side, the other pillar would be the business pillar. Can this company make money in the end? I think only by answering both questions, we can build a successful autonomous driving company.
Got it. All right. So when you founded Bot Auto, what were the core principles that you thought about in regards to commercialization and making this a business? Like, what did you need to do in order to be successful, and, basically talk about how that's going?
Okay. In one word, CPM, in one sentence, CPM is cost per mile.
Got it.
That's one word. North Star.
That's 3 words.
Oh, thank you. CPM. I consider CPM as one word.
One abbreviation, 3 words.
Yeah, one abbreviation. And in one sentence is that eat our own dog food.
Okay.
Considering autonomous driving as the value proposition, what value does autonomous driving bring? 3 things. One, the first item or first term is the removal of the driver. By removing the driver, this technology creates value. Because no human needs to be there attending the truck, driving like 800 miles per day. And the second is the operating cost. This is not something that is not very well discussed. For example, if you're talking about the airline, basically I'm buying air tickets, and the air ticket basically is not only paying for the fuel, but also paying for all of the maintenance and ground crew, right? So operating cost is the second thing. And the third is the customer acquisition cost. That includes how would you get the customer. And thinking about the 3 things, people always focus too much on the first thing, the driver removal value, but they neglect the second, which is underestimated. And they also don't talk about the third, which is dependent on the form of the product. Put it this way. On one hand, if we're building a technology, we say, this is a great technology, you got to buy our technology. Okay, so who's my customer if I'm selling the technology? Only the very big fleet could potentially become our customers. But
Hmm.
remember that 95% of the fleet in the US has less than 10 trucks.
Hmm.
These 95% of the population are not going to be the early adopters of the technology.
Got it. So when you talk about those three aspects, let's start with removing the driver. I mean, I guess to me, one thing that stands out in the trucking space is that the cost of the driver, I imagine, is low relative to the average order value, the load that you're taking, right? An Uber driver, they cost $25 per hour, and, their kind of revenue, I guess, is, kind of not much more than, not much more than that, right? So what is the value of, taking out that driver when you have, I guess you would say like trucks that are very expensive, loads that are very expensive, right? Like insurance that is much more expensive than, kind of what you're paying the driver, which I imagine is, like truck drivers, right? The top drivers are anywhere from 30, 40, $50,000 to maybe $100,000 for the ones that have good jobs with Walmart, right? I mean, it's not a lot relative to $1 million truck and insurance and, I mean, I don't even know what tires on trucks cost, but I'm guessing they're a lot of money, right?
Okay, so let's consider this from a cost per mile perspective.
Okay.
The national average of the coming from the American Trucking Research Institute, they basically release a report every year. The average number per truck driver per mile is $1, like 99 cents. $1.
$1.99. Okay, $1.
Like no, it's actually 99 cents, but
Okay.
approximately $1. $1 cost for
$1 per mile.
per mile for
And
the
that
every
includes,
truck driver's salary, insurance, and basically driver related benefits all put together, national
mhm,
average $1. And if you also aggregate everything on the truck side, you either buy the truck or you lease the truck, take the average, and the tire cost, the fuel cost, the maintenance cost, the permitting cost, the insurance cost, all of that putting together,
mhm.
$1.27
Okay, per mile.
per mile. Yes.
Yeah, which I think kind of makes sense. I mean, the IRS deduction for personal vehicles, right, is, I'm gonna have to look it up, but in that 60 cents range. So it's kind of double for a truck, basically, the kind of approximate cost per mile.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is I think if you're really thinking from the cost per mile, then $1 within this $2.26 type of a big pool is
Hmm.
quite significant.
Yeah, that is a lot.
Yeah. So I think that's the motivation for a lot of people to think, okay, we can remove the driver and then this is a great technology, has great value and great
Mm,
potential. But on the other hand, people don't understand the second part of the cost. What is the operating
mhm.
cost for the very complex autonomous driving system?
Yeah.
And what is the customer acquisition cost? If you're thinking about like buying it to or selling it to the market, how big is your market? And if
Hmm.
you're selling technology, your market is very limited. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, if you're basically saying we're selling the service and that there is 2 million truck drivers in the US and approximately 100,000 driver shortage.
Hmm.
If you're saying that I'm here to fill the gap of the driver shortage, no one is going to be unhappy about that
Yeah.
because we're just filling the shortage for like the work that other people don't pick up. And that market right now today is about 100,000 and
Yeah.
approximately in the year of 2030 will grow to 100,600. Oh, sorry, 160,000.
Well, I think the stat you cited was interesting to me, right? There's 2 million truck drivers. So this is something that I've always heard, and I always thought it was interesting just because broadly, there was a time when there were about 2 million Uber drivers in the United States. Now they've got a few more, but the interest and the excitement and the investment in Uber driving and services around that, I always thought eclipsed truck driving, even though there was the same number of drivers. And I would even argue that, truck drivers spend more on gas, they drive more miles, their vehicles are more expensive, right? So I've always thought that there was kind of this interesting opportunity in the trucking space because of that. And then also, like you mentioned, right, there's this sort of well-known truck driver shortage. Are there any other sort of, broad, I guess you would say insights into the trucking industry that we should be aware of, that are going to impact a company like yours?
Right. It's just, I think thinking about this, every Uber driver mostly sleep at their home and they work in the same city of their
Hmm.
hometown, right? And that is very different in truck driving. In
Mm.
many of the truck driving here, I'm in Houston. Where are you? You're in LA, right?
I'm in Los Angeles, yes.
Yes, you're in LA. If I'm driving to Houston, from Houston to LA, it takes more than a day. And then there
Hmm.
is a 11-hour mandate of truck driving because of human needs to rest. If you're fatigued and driving, it will be
Yeah.
unsafe. So it's always limitation on that. And there's only number of hours you can drive per day,
Mm,
meaning that if I'm driving from Houston to Los Angeles, like this long haul driving,
yeah.
I'm not going to go home until probably the end of the week. I'd probably
Mm,
round trip could take up the whole week. So that gives a lot of like a human factor limitations. I mean,
mhm.
the truck driver has to sacrifice a lot in order to drive from Houston to LA and go back.
Yeah.
And
No,
this
that's
is,
yeah. That's a good point because I know that a few years ago there was some regulations where I think they used to do a lot of it on paper and now it's electronic and much more stringent. A lot of people would just blow right through that 11-hour limit and just, kind of drive nonstop. But, now that you actually have to stop, it actually does have an impact, right? Obviously, a lot of these goods, the faster you can get them delivered, I imagine the more potential revenue. And so, with truck drivers, obviously, I guess there's that kind of like when you think about applying autonomous vehicles to truck driving industry, there's sort of removing the driver, that $1 per mile salary that you talked about, but there's also the speed at which you can get it delivered, right? If the truck is driving and can deliver it in half the time, I mean, how does that add into the equation?
definitely thinking about this. If you're doing air freight, you probably take 1 day or less than 1 day from Houston to LA
Hmm.
for transporting some goods, but the cost is 10x.
Yeah.
In comparison, if you do it with human, maybe four days from LA to Houston, and with autonomy, 1 day.
Mm.
So
Wow.
there is well, basically, I think autonomous driving is, especially for long range driving, is actually offering a very different product than the traditional trucking. There will be team truck drivers, but they're very specific and they're very
Right.
expensive. You got to have two people
Right.
rotating and driving, but that's very special and a very niche market. And in that market, the shortage is the worst.
Yeah, no, I think that team truck drivers are interesting, but as you might imagine, you might not be paying double the salary, but obviously if you've got someone sleeping, you kind of have to compensate, right? There's some additional compensation for that so you can kind of get the
Yeah.
extra speed, but obviously there's always trade-off. So I think that's helpful background. And then I want to dig into something you said too about your business model, right? So talk about your business model. You don't want to be, I guess, some AV trucking players are looking to sell their technology to fleet owners, and it sounds like you don't think that there's enough of them. You don't want to just sell the tech. You actually want to be more of a full service, I guess you would
Yes.
say, operator. Talk a bit about that.
Yeah, sure. We wanted to make sure that we take care of our own cost per mile.
Hmm.
Therefore, we must become the operating company that we deliver the service to our customers. And that also minimizes our customer acquisition cost. We're not talking to a so-called innovation department of a giant company and trying to get their pilot program kick out and running.
Got it.
What we really wanted is
Who
we
are the
wanted
big
this.
trucking companies that you might
Yeah,
talk to?
yeah.
Who are they? What are the names of the big trucking companies?
I would say maybe the big carriers, they can, the UPSs and
Hmm.
FedExes, DHLs, they may
Got
just
it.
have some kind of a like, or Amazon, they may have some
Hmm.
little budget in the innovation department. Like, okay, let's spend $1 million to kickstart a
Got it.
exploratory project, but that's really that's really not going to be massively deployed if you're talking to the innovation department. But what we do is very different. We are a trucking company, and
Mm.
our customer. I mean, I have this quote that our customer don't need to know if our truck are being driven by human, driven by machine, or driven by my tricolor corgi dog.
Got it. Okay. So you guys are a trucking company, is what you tell
Yes.
people.
And we focus on reducing the cost per mile by not only removing the driver, but also optimizing the operating costs in an extreme way so that we can be more efficient and we can basically create some values, not only
Mhm.
for us, but also for our customers.
Got it. So let's talk a bit about optimizing the operating costs. I think, as you mentioned, this is something that people tend to gloss over. Vehicles are expensive to operate, and trucks are even more expensive to operate, as you cited that research. So, and some of these costs, I would say, once you have autonomous, are exactly the same. Tires, brake, well,
Yep.
maybe about the same, right? You still have tires and some of the standard maintenance. But are there additional costs? Are there less costs? What are the sort of operating costs look like in an autonomous world for trucks?
There will be two major part of the autonomous cost. The one part would be the hardware.
Mhm.
You know, and I know that Elon is always criticizing LiDAR being too expensive, even though, I mean, first of all, that's not correct.
Right.
There's a lot of cheap LiDARs available. That's one. And the second is that if you're thinking about the lifetime of a truck, which is about 1 million miles,
Mhm.
and if you amortize that 1 million miles, divided the LiDAR cost by that 1 million miles, say if you're thinking about this, we have,
Yeah.
say, 300,000 hardware cost, including the computing, including the LiDAR and all of the
Mhm.
cameras and all of the retrofitting costs altogether. 300,000 sounds like a crazily astronomical number, right? But you divide it by 1 million miles, you find that, okay, so the cost per mile for hardware is only 30 cents,
Mm.
which is
Got it.
actually acceptable. And compared to a human has $1, and with 30 cents replacing $1, we're happy. Okay,
Okay.
that's
So
one.
that would be kind of I mean, so what does a truck cost? Like the ones that you guys are using?
Basically the same as human. The whole truck is about 200,000.
Okay. So the truck is 200,000. That's obviously whether you have a human or an AV, you've got that cost. And then the autonomous hardware stack on top of that is about 300,000. Is that what you're saying?
Well, 300,000 for today because we are a
Hmm.
tiny fleet. We have a fleet of mighty six, only six trucks. So
Six
that's why a lot
trucks.
of things are being like a 3D printed or a CNC machined,
Mm.
nowhere near to be as cost efficient as we want it to be when we scale up. But
I'll definitely, don't worry. Before we get off, I'll give you the opportunity to tell me your ideal cost, and then we'll hold you to that number. So don't worry about that. But
yeah,
for now, I think that is helpful because okay, it's $300,000 in additional hardware, and I guess does that include any other software costs, or I mean, what are kind of the additional AV costs, integrations, things like that? Is that the all-in
all of
number?
the integration hardware costs are included. But I think the other major portion of the cost, which people are not really focusing on, is the operating cost. The
Okay.
operating cost is in addition to the hardware building cost. Like, for example, if you're thinking about launching a rocket
Hmm.
to the outer space, rocket launching cost is much more than the fuel cost. Because there's a
Got
lot
it.
of things that are just like a one time. And it's very similarly whenever you're like starting. I just like days ago, I think Tesla, oh sorry, SpaceX has a double launch. Basically, they
Hmm.
launch two rockets in a row. And that becomes a news.
Mm.
It's a news piece. Why? Because people can't even imagine that the two rockets can be launched next to each
Hmm.
other. But considering the airplane takeoff, if you're in an airport, airplane, of course, they take off like after one. So I
Right.
think that's a very big major difference in today's autonomous trucking industry. Most of the companies are still in the relatively early stage, no matter how how they talk about their in the marketing department
Hmm.
talking about their collaboration, their project, and then their big names on their website. The
Yeah.
reality is that the technology today is not ready for day-to-day operation, continuous operation serving the
Yeah.
customers.
Well, and I think this is something that I pointed out with, autonomous ride hail, for example, right? There are actually some real additional costs, right? Right now, Uber drivers go home at the end of the night. And if they live in Los Angeles, they live an hour east, north, south, where it's cheaper, where, real estate is much less, parking is much less, versus Waymo. They've got a lot, right next to SoFi Stadium in Inglewood that's pretty premium real estate where they have cars and they have maintenance people. And, I think as they scale, they're going to need more. They can't have lots an hour away. So are there any costs like that are real, sort of additional costs that you have to bear? I mean, if you're doing truck driving, you may not, I mean, where do they stop? Do they need to, kind of fill up for gas, or can they make the trip, things like that? What are the kind of main, I would call like additional AV costs that humans used to take care of pretty easily, but maybe now you need to send someone out to the middle of, the I-10 from Texas to LA to handle something?
Absolutely, yes. I think this is about the technology choice. The cost per mile concept is actually driving how we develop the technology from bottom up.
Hmm.
For example, we are focusing a lot on reducing the cost per mile from day one. So we have very minimum requirements for the yard and terminal cost.
Hmm.
And for example, we're working with our partner Riggy's, which is a pretty popular one in Houston.
Yeah.
And we basically use their yard, and our rental fee is $10 per spot per
Okay.
day. It's like a minimum. And in comparison, I know that some other autonomous driving company has actually invested in their yards. Why? Because they need to do some kind of calibration work, and their
Hmm.
data transfer needs pretty high-end networking capabilities. All of these are
Connections.
actually driving up the cost to several millions of
Hmm.
dollars per site.
Got it. And so, let's talk about, sort of what this looks like in real life. I think you guys made the news recently and we featured this. And then, of course, I reached out to you to have you on the podcast because, like I always seem to mention to my audience that my bar are sort of these driverless rides, right? Getting rid of the driver. You recently completed a humanless validation run. So can you talk about that, what it involved and why is it significant?
Sure. At the first year of the company, we have already finished the so-called hub-to-hub run, which there is a test driver and the vehicle is driving all by itself from one hub to the other, basically completing the mission for commercial hauling. And then after that, we've been focusing a lot on building up the redundancy of the system. Because
Hmm.
truck driving is on the highway, we do not have the capabilities such as the robotaxis where you can remotely controlling the vehicle because the speed is so high. And in
Right.
many areas in the highway, you don't even have cellular signals. Uh, the latency is basically disabling any remote controlling capability. Therefore, the
Hmm.
truck has to be taking care of itself, even in the worst possible scenario that there is a hardware failure. And so the redundancy design and so-called functional safety is a key thing in the second year of development for Bot Auto that we focus a lot in having redundant sensors, redundant computing unit, redundant power, and redundant actuation components. Once all of that have been being designed, developed, and validated in software, in the bench labs, and then in closed loop tracks, and finally in public highway, we feel that we have gone through the entire cycle. This is called a verification validation cycle, VMV cycle, where we completed all of our internal rigorous validation and we
Hmm.
submitted the so-called safety case, a safety report demonstrating to the governmental officers that we have completed all of the safety considerations and here are the evidence for each of the safety claims that we wanted to make.
Hmm.
And of course, there's a kind of a frameworks for us to follow, but we basically follow the standard framework UL 4600 and then submitting all of this evidence to the government. That's the moment we feel, okay, now we're ready to launch our first driver out run.
Got it. And so that driver outrun, what were the details on that?
It's a about 1 hour run starting from our hub, like public hub,
Yeah.
Riggy's. And then with a trailer, but no remote control where nobody sitting in the car, of course. The vehicle is driving all by itself in an uncontrolled environment,
Hmm.
public environment, surface street first, and going through some surface street and go onto the highway. And because it's a 1 hour run and it's an internal validation, we don't haul cargo in it, making
Yeah.
the U-turn and return to the bay in 1 hour. And the timing of that is, I think we started by around the 7 or 8 p.m. And when we start, it's still some sunlight. And when we finish, it's already pretty dark.
Yeah. So I think what stood out to me about this run is that you guys really went for it. You started in light, you ended in darkness. You started on the streets, you went on the freeway and you came back. Was there a reason why, you sort of went and kind of knocked out all these challenging use cases at the start instead of, during the day, go around the streets and come back?
Well, I think this is the interesting observation that we have seen that for autonomous driving, the technology has grown to the point where the so-called generalization power of the neural network of the perception system
Hmm.
has gone very strong. And
Yeah.
we feel that yes, one neural network can actually handle both daylight and the nighttime driving.
Hmm.
We're happy to basically showcase that capability implicitly.
Yeah, no, I think it was very impressive, and you guys were transparent about it too, which I liked. I think you released a video which was sped up, so I didn't have to actually watch the whole hour, but it was sped up at 8x, I believe, and actually showed the truck going on and around the streets and up and down. And so I think that transparency was cool. It's one of the reasons I was excited to feature the story and have you on the podcast. I also have to say that, it seems quite fast for you to do all of this in basically what, 2.5 years. You also haven't, I don't know if you know this, but I think you're somewhat famous in the industry for not having raised a lot of money. I believe your last round was $20 million or so. And, I just saw the news yesterday that Wave raised $2 billion. So I don't know what you think about that, but what do you think about sort of that, sort of the money and the speed with which you've been able to do this?
Yeah, I think, I'm a seasoned entrepreneur. So I have already felt when I'm choose to begin this journey, I know that I'm going to live in the world of after hype, that
Hmm.
I will probably attract a lot of the attentions Of course, I wanted to figure out the secret sauce for some of that other company who can raise billions of dollars of money. Of course, jealous. But on the other hand, I think the reality, the baseline performance for us is to raise the money that we need to, and we develop things, and we keep the very very kind of a normal mindset. Like on one hand, earlier in the beginning of this year, the DeepSeek moment has
Mhm.
come, and basically it's a wake up
Yeah.
call for a lot of companies who spend tens of millions of dollars in just training. They spend like a little bit more than $5 million. They train a very amazing neural network. Similar to us, I think we wanted to keep it very, very, grounded, such that we don't really treat the technology as a slogan for us to raise money. We consider
Right.
ourselves nothing special but a chain restaurant business. As long as we can make money in one
Yeah.
McDonald's, and then we can make money with with the same McDonald's recipe and same McDonald's or organization in another city. And basically for us, it's like, can we make money in every mile? If you can make
Mhm.
money in every mile, we just have a simple, prudent business, and we grow the business and we make money out of it. And I think that's my vision. So that's why we keep a small fleet of the very small fleet so that we can control our burn rates. And we
Mhm.
also wanted to reduce the cost per mile. By the way, we're almost at the point our data collection is free. Thinking
Mm.
about this, of course, autonomous driving requires data collection. But if our data collection cost is equal to the revenue per mile that we generate, how beautiful is that, right?
Yeah.
Then we don't need to raise the billions of dollars from the VCs and
Yeah.
spending all of this money like for data collection. I think we can get very cheap data collection and basically free data to nurture our neural network training.
Yeah. So what do you need to happen, or what do you need to do to make money and to, kind of increase, your revenue over the cost per mile?
I think
Or are
first
you
of
already
all,
there?
yeah, we are almost there. Right now for that driver out run, if you say that, because that is only one run, but if you take the average of the driver cost for our team, and if you also take the average total cost per mile for the entire fleet, and you minus the driver cost, associated with like a driver training, and
Mhm.
then free meals and
Yeah.
insurance and 401k match, if you put everything aside, our implied driver out cost is $1.89.
Got it. Per mile.
That is lower than our average revenue per mile, which is $2.70.
Mhm.
Making
Right.
Meaning that we're already making money out of it. And the goal is to, okay, continue iterating the algorithm, making sure that we will have our second, third, fourth driver out very quickly. We're going to basically our software get it more and more and more
Mhm.
like feature being feature being like put into the newer version of the software, and
Yeah.
also having some hardware upgrades. We'll have continuous driver out operation very soon next year, and by that time we're going to make money.
Got it. Well, so I think, how do you balance? I mean, you're kind of running two companies, right? You've got a trucking company and you've also got an AV company, right? So how do you balance improving the technology and, reducing your cost per mile? But at the same time, you're going to have to start getting customers. You're going to have to start filling routes and, doing all the duties of a trucking company. I don't know. Is that part of the business hard, or is the AV part harder?
I think a lot of the people are afraid of running like having two half of the brains both operating, and I think that's really the problem for many other autonomous driving companies. Therefore, they chose to only activate one part of it, which is the
Got it.
technology part. But we just have to marry the two halves of the brain altogether,
Hmm.
because this is really on the technology side. We may have five different approaches, for example, to implement the map. You
Hmm.
probably have heard people talking about mapless, or
Hmm. Yeah.
like high definition map, or low definition map, or mapless. But for us, we don't really care. All that we care is, as long as our map is cheap enough, we choose the cheapest and the safest implementation of the map. Then we
Yeah.
choose this. Our mapping total cost is probably less than $0.1 per mile. We're happy with
Hmm.
that, even though some people would maybe try to like dwarf us by saying, look, we are a mapless company and you are still using map, meaning that your technology is inferior to us. We don't really care. We don't talk about whether the technology is inferior or superior. We talk about the product.
Yeah.
You see,
Well,
this
and
is how the technology is being married with the operation. We just don't really have that kind of a technology superiority type of thinking.
Yeah. And I mean, I think like in any business, usually customer acquisition is one of the most challenging, most expensive parts of the business. I kind of imagine that for you guys, getting customers might be pretty easy if you're cheaper than other options. Like everyone that's doing millions of miles probably wants to come to you and now save millions of dollars, right? So do you envision if you can get that cost per mile lower than what it costs for a human that, you'll have no problem getting customers?
Well, let's talk about economics of that. First of all, yes, it's very easy for us to get customers. And it's not because we're cheaper, because
Hmm.
first of all, we don't want it to be cheaper. We want it to be at the same level of a human price because we don't want it to compete against human. But on the other hand, we are better, intrinsically better, because our operation is very precise and very high
Hmm.
quality. Like, for example, I think our on-time rate is more than 99% of the time over the past 10 months of operation. We already operated for more than 10 months. So we're pretty precise on timing. And we can easily make sure that our dispatching system and our like telematics system are all open to our customers so that they actually know where the trucks are.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of other perks, and don't even mention that driving from Houston to LA taking only 1 day.
Yeah.
All of these things are our competitive advantages, but we don't feel that we need to compete against a human on the pricing.
Why don't you want to compete against humans? I mean, I think that's the whole premise of AVs, when it comes to ride hail that, hey, Waymo should eventually be cheaper than Uber, right? You know.
I would say that even like talk about the mid future, say 2033.
Hmm.
I don't really see a chance in my best dreams that bot auto will be the demand.
Got it. So you think that
Meaning
there's
that
enough demand
we're
out there that you don't even need to be cheaper. I mean, you can be the
exactly,
same
yeah,
price and your margins will be higher accordingly.
sure, yes. I think we're going to fight against the driver shortage issue, and I
Mm.
mean even in my best expectation, at the 2033, we're probably going to be maybe my company is going to be like a 10% or 20% of that driver shortage gap.
Hmm.
I mean, that's the best
Got it.
dream that I can imagine. And then that during that
So there's
time,
a
we're
lot
talking
of
about
pent up demand. You're kind of filling that supply. And I mean, actually, frankly, that's sort of what we're seeing with Waymo right now. They're charging 30 to 40% more than Uber because it's a premium product, it's a premium experience. Passengers are also willing to wait longer and wait for a Waymo, right? So it's kind of
yes.
like, whoa, that's pretty unique. Why would you be cheaper if you can capture all of that additional margin? And, why would you even add, or scale too quickly, right? If you don't need to. So I guess that's kind of what you're explaining. You reduce the cost per mile at the same time, your margins might increase, your profitability might increase. You can invest in more trucks.
Yeah, and we're talking about 2033, 20,000 trucks.
Mhm.
And if we drive the 20,000 trucks round the clock, I'm talking about 15 billion revenue.
Yeah, got it. So that's the goal for the company.
Yeah, by 2033.
Okay. All right. I like that lofty goal. So I hopefully will expect to see a lot of trucks out on the road. And before I let you go, I did want to ask you one last thing because it comes up a lot for us. Freeway driving, right? Highway driving. This is something that, Waymo is testing. It's not enabled for paying customers just yet, but, I've got a Tesla. I used to have a Tesla and Tesla full self-driving. I've got a Rivian now, their highway assist product. It's pretty good on the highways, I have to say. I feel very safe, not a ton of issues. And obviously, it's kind of only one data point, but I've been using it for 9 years. It seems to me, as a non technologist, that freeway driving is simpler from, kind of a technological standpoint, but higher stakes because of the speed and because, like you mentioned, you can't just pull over when you're going 70 miles an hour on the highway. So, do you agree with that? And maybe talk a little bit about freeway driving, highway driving in the context of the autonomous vehicle stack.
I would say the highway driving versus urban driving is a different game, and that there are pros and cons for driving on highway versus driving on the surface street. The biggest difference that I see would be the liability determination.
Mm.
And I think that is the key. And it is actually a more obvious thing or the more important thing for truck driving because people talk about the mass of the truck. But simply because of the mass of the truck does not allow the truck to stop immediately or does not allow the truck to dodge the bullet. If there is an accident, liability is always the first thing to think about.
Yeah.
And in order to build an autonomous driving truck, we are here to minimize liability. And we acknowledge that in certain scenarios, trucks cannot dodge bullets, especially if we're like having a passive hit by others.
Yeah.
And in highway driving, this type of liability determination is much more clear than the robotaxi in urban street. Like if you're having a fender bender with a cyclist, okay, that would be tricky always. Like
Yeah.
it's very hard to determine, okay, so you're free from liability and that's all his fault or her fault.
Mhm.
You don't have that in urban, but in highway driving, yes, that's much clearer. And that's a
Mhm.
very helpful thing for autonomous trucking on highway. But on the other hand, I think urban driving, there's a lot of other challenges. For example, the scenario is more complex and it requires immediate reaction. If I'm making an analogy, I would say highway driving for truck is more like playing Angry Bird. You aim, you shoot, and there's very little thing that you can do in the middle of it. There are
Got it.
some, but not a lot. But for a robotaxi driving on urban street, is more like a street fighter. You
Mhm.
have immediate action and reaction, reaction,
Yeah.
very fast paced. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest difference. But as you can see, like Waymo has not opened up their highway driving for passengers. I mean, there's a reason for that. And I think they have also publicly talked about the challenges for this. And I think, yeah, these are basically two different animals.
But what are those challenges? Because I think, like I mentioned with your first route, you guys did do city streets and you jumped onto the highway. And obviously, it was one run, and Waymo's doing hundreds of thousands of trips per week. So it's a
Sure.
bit different scale. But, obviously, yeah, I guess I kind of heard that explanation too, that it's kind of a different animal, driving on highways versus streets. But seems like you mentioned, right? Like I'm guessing the neural network that you're using or the training, kind of applies to both, maybe.
Well, I would say that the driving a long-term temporal horizon for planning is
Mhm.
going to make things very different. That's probably the biggest difference that I can see, and also the perception range, especially how you can interpret other people's intention from the longer distance, is also I would say a major difference between the two applications.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Well, interesting. I appreciate the technical deep dive here and there. I like using this podcast as education for myself, and definitely was great to learn about Bot Auto. And I especially appreciate all of the transparency we've seen so far from you and your company, and the willingness to discuss the commercialization and business aspect of the business, because I think that's kind of a very cool inflection point that we're at right now. So we're excited to see where you go next. I'm guessing if folks want to learn more, they can go to Bot Auto's website, follow you on LinkedIn. Anything else we should mention?
I think that's all.
All right, great. Xiaodi, I appreciate you coming on. Take care.
Thank you very much, Harry.